Part 1. The Rise of Athens. Pericles and the Golden Age. The year is 429 BCE. The month, late summer, possibly August or early September by our modern reckoning, though the ancient Greeks would have called it Metageitnion, or perhaps early Bodromion, measuring time by the phases of the moon and the cycles of religious festivals rather than our solar calendar. But before we can understand the miracle that is about to unfold, before we can grasp how Athens will rise from ashes to become the most influential city in human history, we must first understand the world as it existed in this pivotal moment. Close your eyes and travel back 25 centuries. Not just years, but an entirely different reality. A world of approximately 100 million human beings scattered across the known continents, a global population smaller than modern Egypt or Vietnam. A world where the fastest communication travels at the speed of a running man or a sailing ship. Where the greatest library contains perhaps 10,000 scrolls rather than millions of books. Where human life expectancy averages 35 years, dragged down by catastrophic infant mortality that claims one in every 2 children before their 5th birthday. This is the Mediterranean world in what historians will later call the classical period of ancient Greece. Though the people living through these events have no such label, no sense that they're living through what future generations will consider a golden age, they're simply trying to survive in a world that has recently experienced apocalyptic warfare. Let us establish the geopolitical landscape with precision. The Persian Empire, circa 479 BCE. The Achaemenid Persian Empire, founded by Cyrus the Great in 550 BCE and expanded by his successors, stretches from the Indus River Valley in modern Pakistan to the Mediterranean coast and Egyptian borders. Conservative estimates put its extent at 1 million square miles, roughly the size of the entire Roman Empire at its height, making it the largest empire the world has yet seen. Population. Modern scholars estimate 20 to 25 million people, perhaps representing 20 to 25% of the entire human population at this time. To put this in perspective, the Persian Empire contains more people than all of Europe combined. The empire is divided into approximately 20 satrapies, provinces, each governed by a satrap who answers directly to the great king. These provinces include Persis, the Persian heartland, modern Fars province in Iran; Media, northwestern Iran; Parthia, northeastern Iran; Bactria, modern Afghanistan, Uzbekistan; Arya, western Afghanistan; Drangiana, southern Afghanistan; Arachosia, southeastern Afghanistan, Pakistan; Satagidia, Pakistan; Gandhara, Pakistan-Afghanistan border; Hindush, Indus Valley; Babylonia, Iraq; Assyria, northern Iraq; Arabia, northern Arabian Peninsula; Egypt, conquered by Cambyses II in 525 BCE; Armenia, Cappadocia, central Anatolia; Lydia, western Anatolia, including the conquered Greek cities of Ionia; Ionia, the Greek cities on the Aegean coast of Asia Minor; Thrace, conquered territory in southeastern Europe; and others. Annual tribute flowing to the Persian treasury from these provinces is measured in thousands of talents of silver, where 1 talent equals approximately 57 pounds of silver, representing perhaps 6,000 drachmas, or about 16 years of wages for a skilled craftsman. The total annual revenue may exceed 14,500 talents, an almost incomprehensible sum representing billions of modern dollars. The Greek world, circa 479 BCE. In stark contrast, the Greek world consists of hundreds of independent city-states, polis, scattered around the Mediterranean and Black Sea coasts, what the Greeks call their oikoumene, the inhabited world as they know it. Major Greek regions include Mainland Greece, Attica, Athens, Boeotia, Thebes, Laconia, Sparta, Messenia, Elis, Achaea, Arcadia, Argolis, Argos, Corinthia, Corinth, Megaris, Megara, Phocis, Delphi, Locris, Thessaly, Epirus, Macedonia, the Peloponnese, the large peninsula connected to mainland Greece by the Isthmus of Corinth, containing Sparta, Argos, Corinth, Elis, home of Olympia, and many smaller cities, the Greek islands, Crete, Euboea, the Cyclades, Delos, Naxos, Paros, Melos, etc., the Dodecanese, Rhodes, Kos, etc., the islands of the northeastern Aegean, Lesbos, Chios, Samos, etc., Ionia, Greek cities on the coast of Asia Minor, modern Turkey, Miletus, Ephesus, Priene, Colophon, Smyrna, and others, currently under Persian control after failed revolts Magna Graecia. Greater Greece, the Greek colonies in southern Italy and Sicily-Syracuse, Tarentum, Croton, Rhegium, and dozens of others, Black Sea colonies, Greek settlements around the Euxine, Black Sea, crucial for grain imports North Africa, Cyrene and other Greek cities in modern Libya, Egypt, the Greek trading post of Naucratis in the Nile Delta total. Greek population across all these regions, perhaps 3 to 4 million, with approximately 300,000 in Attica, the region controlled by Athens, making Athens one of the larger Greek states, but still tiny compared to Persian provincial populations. Now let us establish the immediate historical context, the events of the recent past that have brought us to this pivotal moment in 479 BCE. The Ionian Revolt, 499-493 BCE. Our story begins with rebellion. In 499 BCE, the Greek cities of Ionia, prosperous trading cities on the coast of Asia Minor, that have been under Persian control since Cyrus the Great's conquests in the 540s BCE, rose in revolt against their Persian overlords. The rebellion was sparked by Aristagoras, the tyrant of Miletus, who had fallen out of favor with the Persian satraps and saw revolution as his only path to survival. He traveled to mainland Greece, seeking allies. Sparta, the dominant military power in Greece, refused to help too far away, too risky, not their problem. But Athens voted to send 20 ships to support the rebellion. 20 ships. The Athenians would later regret this decision, but in the moment it seemed like supporting fellow Greeks against barbarian oppressors was the honorable thing to do. Eretria, a city on the island of Euboea, sent 5 more ships. In 498 BCE, this combined Greek-Ionian force marched on Sardis, the capital of the satrapy of Lydia and the Persian administrative center for western Anatolia. They captured and burned the city, an act of spectacular boldness and equally spectacular foolishness, because it accomplished nothing strategically while enraging King Darius the Thin of Persia beyond measure. The Persians counterattacked with overwhelming force. By 494 BCE, the revolt was crushed. Miletus was besieged, captured, and destroyed with horrific violence. The men killed, the women and children sold into slavery, the city leveled. This destruction was so traumatic that when the Athenian playwright Phrynichus staged a tragedy about it titled The Capture of Miletus, the audience wept uncontrollably, and Phrynichus was fined 1,000 drachmas for reminding the Athenians of their own misfortunes. The play was banned from ever being performed again, but Darius didn't forget Athens' 20 ships. According to Herodotus, he ordered a servant to say to him 3 times every day, "Master, remember the Athenians." The first Persian invasion, 492-490 BCE. In 492 BCE, Darius sent his son-in-law Mardonius with an army and fleet to begin the conquest of Greece. This expedition ended in disaster when the fleet was wrecked by a storm off Mount Athos, with perhaps 300 ships lost and 20,000 men drowned or killed. Mardonius withdrew. In 490 BCE, Darius tried again. This time he sent a naval expedition under commanders Datis, a Mede, and Artaphernes, Darius's nephew, directly across the Aegean. The fleet, perhaps 600 ships carrying 25,000 infantry and cavalry island-hopped across the Cyclades, subduing islands and taking hostages to ensure compliance. They reached Eretria first, the other city that had helped the Ionian Revolt. After a 6-day siege and internal betrayal, Eretria fell. The city was burned, the temples destroyed, the population enslaved and deported to Persia, fulfilling Darius's promise that cities that defied him would be punished with enslavement and deportation. Then the Persians crossed to mainland Greece and landed at Marathon, a coastal plain about 26 miles northeast of Athens. This location was chosen on the advice of Hippias, the former tyrant of Athens, who had been expelled by democratic revolution in 510 BCE and had been living in Persian-controlled territory ever since, hoping to be restored to power by Persian arms. The Battle of Marathon, September 12, 490 BCE. The Athenians faced an impossible decision: wait behind their walls and endure siege, or march out to meet the Persian army in open battle. They chose to fight. The Athenian army, perhaps 10,000 hoplites, heavy infantry, led by 10 generals including Miltiades and Callimachus, marched to Marathon. They were joined by about 1,000 hoplites from the small city of Plataea, their only ally. Sparta had promised help, but claimed they couldn't march until after the full moon for religious reasons. Whether this was genuine piety or convenient excuse is debated, but they arrived too late. So 11,000 Greeks faced perhaps 25,000 Persians on the plain of Marathon. The Athenian commanders debated whether to attack. Miltiades argued for immediate assault before Persian reinforcements could arrive, or the Persians could march on Athens. The Polemarch, war leader, Callimachus, cast the deciding vote: attack. On that September morning in 490 BCE, the Athenian and Plataean hoplites charged across the plain at a run perhaps 200 yards to minimize exposure to Persian arrows. The center of the Greek line was thin, only 4 ranks deep instead of the usual 8, but the wings were strengthened. The battle was brutal and surprisingly brief, perhaps only a few hours. The Persian center broke through the weak Greek center, but the strong Greek wings enveloped and routed the Persian wings, then turned inward to attack the Persian center from behind. The Persians broke and fled to their ships. The casualties tell the story. The Greeks lost 192 Athenians. We know this precisely because the fallen were buried under a tumulus mound that still exists, and their names were recorded. And 11 Plataeans. Persian losses are uncertain. Herodotus claims 6,400, which may be exaggerated, but it was certainly several thousand. Immediately after the battle, the Athenian army made a forced march back to Athens, those same 26 miles, still wearing armor, still carrying shields, to prevent the Persian fleet from sailing around and attacking an undefended city. According to legend, the runner Phidippides had already run from Athens to Sparta and back, about 300 miles total over rough terrain, seeking help before the battle. And after Marathon, he ran to Athens to announce victory before collapsing dead. This is the legendary origin of the modern marathon race, though the story is probably apocryphal. The Persian fleet did sail around to Athens, but seeing the army had returned, they withdrew and sailed back to Asia Minor. Athens had defeated the mighty Persian Empire, against all odds, against all logic. A city-state of 40,000 citizens had repelled an invasion by an empire of 20 million. But Marathon was not the end. It was merely the prologue. Darius swore vengeance and began preparing an even larger invasion. But in 486 BCE, Egypt revolted against Persian rule, forcing him to postpone the Greek campaign. And then, in that same year, Darius died. His son Xerxes inherited both the throne and the obsession with conquering Greece. Xerxes' preparations, 480 BCE. Xerxes, his name in Old Persian, was Kashayarsha, meaning ruling over heroes, spent 4 years preparing the greatest military expedition in ancient history. First, he had to secure his rear. In 484 BCE, he crushed the Egyptian revolt with overwhelming force, reimposing Persian control and installing his brother Achaemenes as satrap. Then he began assembling an army and fleet from every corner of the empire. The logistics were staggering. Supply depots were established along the route from Persia to Greece. Vast quantities of grain were stockpiled. In Thrace and Macedonia, Persian agents purchased or requisitioned food supplies years in advance. A canal was dug through the Mount Athos Peninsula, about 1.2 miles long, wide enough for 2 triremes to pass each other, taking perhaps 3 years to complete with thousands of workers. Why? Because Mardonius's fleet had been wrecked off Mount Athos in 492 BCE, and Xerxes wanted to avoid the same fate. Most impressively, Xerxes ordered the construction of 2 pontoon bridges across the Hellespont, the Dardanelles, the strait separating Asia from Europe, about 4,600 feet wide at the narrowest point. Hundreds of ships were lashed together with flax and papyrus cables, with wooden planks laid across them and earth piled on top, with screens on the sides so horses wouldn't panic at the sight of water. When storms destroyed the first bridge, Xerxes, in a display of absolute power and perhaps madness, ordered the Hellespont itself whipped with 300 lashes and branded with hot irons as punishment before building a stronger bridge. The second Persian invasion, 480 BCE. In the spring of 480 BCE, Xerxes marched from Sardis with an army that Herodotus claims numbered over 2 million soldiers and support personnel. Almost certainly a massive exaggeration, but even conservative modern estimates suggest 200,000 tons, 300,000 fighting men, the largest army ever assembled in the ancient world up to that point. The army was incredibly diverse, representing the multinational nature of the empire. 10,000 immortals, elite Persian and Median infantry, so named because their number was kept constant, Persian cavalry and infantry, Median cavalry, Bactrian cavalry on horses and camels, Indian infantry with cotton armor and cane bows, Ethiopians in lion skins with painted bodies, Thracians with fox skin caps, Phrygians, Lydians, Mysians, Paphlagonians from Anatolia, Assyrians with bronze helmets, Egyptians with massive shields, and dozens more ethnic contingents, each with distinct equipment and fighting styles. The fleet numbered approximately 1,200 warships, mostly Phoenician triremes. The Phoenicians were master shipbuilders, plus Egyptian, Ionian Greek, and other vessels, plus perhaps 3,000 transport ships. The crossing of the Hellespont took 7 days and 7 nights, with the army marching continuously. Herodotus provides a famous detail. Xerxes had a throne set up on a hill to watch the crossing, and he wept. When asked why, he said he was weeping, because in 100 years all these men would be dead, reflecting on the mortality of even the greatest army. The army marched through Thrace, which submitted without a fight. It reached Macedonia, whose king Alexander III, ancestor of Alexander the Great, also submitted and provided supplies. Most of Thessaly, in northern Greece, submitted as well. The Greek response. Meanwhile, the Greeks were desperately trying to organize resistance. In 481 BCE, representatives from various city-states met at Corinth to form the Hellenic League, a defensive alliance. Something unprecedented in Greek history, where city-states were usually more interested in fighting each other than cooperating. Approximately 31 city-states joined the League, though many other Greek cities either stayed neutral or actively collaborated with Persia, Medised. The League appointed Sparta as the leader, both because Sparta had the reputation as Greece's premier military power, and because Athenian leadership would have been unacceptable to Sparta and other cities. Athens contributed the largest navy, about 200 triremes, out of the approximately 380 total Greek warships. This was thanks to Themistocles, who in 483 BCE had discovered rich silver veins at Laurion in southern Attica, and convinced the Athenians to spend the windfall on building a massive fleet rather than distributing it to citizens. His argument: Athens needed a navy to fight Aegina, a rival city, and to prepare for the inevitable Persian return. This decision would save Greece. The League sent spies to Asia Minor to observe Xerxes' preparations. They sent embassies to various Greek cities, trying to persuade them to join the alliance. They consulted the oracle at Delphi, receiving typically ambiguous prophecies. The most famous oracle was delivered to Athens. The first response was apocalyptic. "Why sit you here? Fly, fly to the ends of creation, leaving your homes and the crags which your city crowns with her circlet. Neither the head nor the body is firm in its place, nor at bottom firm the feet, nor the hands, nor are the middle parts firm. All ruined and lost, since fire and the headlong war god, speeding in a Syrian chariot, shall bring you destruction." The Athenian ambassadors begged for a less terrible prophecy. The Pythia, priestess, spoke again. "Yet Zeus, the all-seeing, grants to Athena a boon, that the wooden wall only shall not fall, but help you and your children. But await not the host of horse and foot coming from Asia, nor be still, but turn your back and withdraw from the foe. Truly a day will come when you will meet him face to face. Divine Salamis, you will bring death to women's sons when the corn is scattered, or the harvest gathered in." Themistocles argued brilliantly that wooden wall meant ships, not the wooden palisade around the Acropolis, as some claimed, and that divine Salamis promised victory if they fought a naval battle near that island. He convinced the assembly to evacuate Athens and prepare to fight at sea. Thermopylae, August 480 BCE. The Greek League decided to make its first stand at Thermopylae, Hot Gates, a narrow pass between mountains and sea on the eastern coast of central Greece. Here, geography might negate Persian numerical superiority. King Leonidas of Sparta led approximately 7,000 Greek soldiers to hold the pass. This force included 300 Spartans, Leonidas's personal bodyguard, chosen specifically because they had living sons, 220 Arcadians, 1,000 Phocians, 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, plus smaller contingents from other cities. Why so few? Most Greek armies were still mustering. The Olympic Games were being held, a sacred truce, and Sparta was celebrating the Carneia festival, sacred to Apollo. Both events prohibited military campaigns. These 7,000 were an advance guard, expected to hold until the main armies arrived. For 3 days, probably August 17-19, 480 BCE, the Greeks held the pass against repeated Persian assaults. Xerxes sent wave after wave, Medes, Scythians, his immortals against the Greek phalanx. All were repulsed with heavy losses. Then betrayal. A local Greek named Ephialtes revealed a mountain path, the Plataea path that led around the pass. Xerxes sent his immortals on a night march. At dawn, they emerged behind the Greek position. Realizing he was surrounded, Leonidas dismissed most of the army, ordering them to retreat and continue the fight elsewhere, but stayed with his 300 Spartans. The 700 Thespians refused to leave, choosing to fight to the death alongside the Spartans, an act of extraordinary courage that deserves to be remembered alongside the Spartans. Some Thebans also remained, though whether voluntarily is debated. They fought with legendary fury. When spears broke, they fought with swords. When swords broke, they fought with daggers, fists, and teeth. They fought over Leonidas's body 4 times, retrieving it from Persian hands. Finally, the survivors withdrew to a small hill, the Colonus Hill, and made their final stand. The Persians, no longer willing to engage in close combat, simply surrounded them and shot them with arrows until all were dead. Persian losses were enormous. Herodotus claims 20,000, certainly an exaggeration, but probably several thousand, including 2 of Xerxes' brothers. Xerxes was so enraged that he had Leonidas's body beheaded and crucified, an unprecedented desecration. The epitaph carved on a stone marker afterward became one of history's most famous inscriptions. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie." The sack of Athens, September 480 BCE. With Thermopylae lost, central Greece lay open to Persian invasion. The Greek fleet had fought a series of inconclusive naval battles at Artemisium, off the northern coast of Euboea, but withdrew when Thermopylae fell. The Athenians, true to Themistocles' plan, evacuated their city. This was a traumatic, massive undertaking. Approximately 200,000–300,000 people had to be moved. Women, children, and elderly were sent to Salamis, Troezen in the Peloponnese, and Aegina. All able-bodied men of military age went to the fleet-sacred objects, and temple treasures were evacuated. Everything else was abandoned. Imagine the scene. Streets filled with refugees carrying what they could. Ships overloaded with evacuees, sailing constantly between Piraeus and safe harbors. The elderly who could barely walk being helped by family. Children crying. The wealthy abandoning comfortable homes. The poor abandoning their few possessions. Everyone looking back at the city they might never see again. A few hundred defenders remained on the Acropolis, barricading themselves behind a wooden palisade. They were killed or committed suicide by jumping from the cliffs. When the Persians entered Athens, they found it nearly empty, a ghost city. Following Xerxes' orders, they systematically burned it. The agora, marketplace, was burned. Homes were burned. The temples on the Acropolis were burned. The old temple of Athena Polias, probably built in the 6th century BCE, the archaic temples, the treasuries, the wooden structures. The sacred olive tree supposedly planted by Athena herself, symbol of the goddess's gift and protection, was burned to a stump. Archaeological evidence confirms this destruction. A layer of ash and burned debris from this period has been found across the Acropolis. Fragments of destroyed sculptures, later buried in fill, show evidence of intense fire damage. The foundations of the burned temples were left visible for decades as a reminder of Persian sacrilege. From Salamis, the Athenian refugees could see the smoke rising from their burning city. Everything was lost. Their homes, their temples, their sacred places, their history carved in stone and wood. The physical embodiment of Athens destroyed. But the Athenians themselves survived. And that would make all the difference. The Battle of Salamis, September 29th, 480 BCE. The Greek fleet, approximately 380 triremes, gathered in the straits between Salamis Island and the mainland. The Persian fleet, perhaps 800 ships after losses at Artemisium, sailed to destroy them. There was fierce debate among Greek commanders. Many wanted to sail to the Isthmus of Corinth and defend the Peloponnese. Themistocles argued for fighting at Salamis, where narrow waters would negate Persian numbers. According to Herodotus, Themistocles sent a secret message to Xerxes through his slave Sisinus, claiming the Greeks were about to flee and suggesting the Persians should block both exits of the strait to trap them. Xerxes, believing this, ordered his fleet to enter the strait and seal both ends. This was exactly what Themistocles wanted, the Persians in confined waters. At dawn on September 29th, probably ancient sources don't give exact dates, the battle began. Xerxes watched from a golden throne on Mount Agelaeus. The battle lasted all day. In the narrow strait, Greek triremes had room to maneuver. Persian ships crowded each other. Greek crews were better trained. Persian crews included conscripts from various nations with varying skill. Greek rams, bronze-sheathed prows, punched holes in Persian ships. When ships collided and combat became hand-to-hand, Greek hoplites in armor outfought lightly armed Persian marines. The Persian fleet was destroyed. Perhaps 300 ships sunk or captured. The Greeks lost about 40 ships. The most famous casualty, Artemisia, queen of Halicarnassus, a Greek city under Persian rule, who commanded 5 ships with such skill that Xerxes said, "My men have become women, and my women have become men." She sank a Persian ship, possibly intentionally, to escape Greek pursuers, and Xerxes, thinking she'd sunk a Greek ship, praised her while cursing his other commanders. Xerxes, stunned by the disaster, realized he couldn't maintain his army in Greece without naval support. The fleet had been crucial for supplies. He left his general Mardonius with perhaps 100,000–150,000 troops to winter in Greece and complete the conquest in spring, then withdrew to Persia with the remainder of the army. The Battle of Plataea, August 27th, 479 BCE. In the spring of 479 BCE, Mardonius attempted diplomacy. He offered Athens generous terms if it would abandon the Greek alliance and join Persia. Alexander the Fourm of Macedon served as intermediary. The Athenians refused. Their spokesman Aristides said, "As long as the sun keeps its present course, we shall never come to terms with Xerxes." Mardonius invaded Attica again, occupying Athens. The Athenians evacuated again, and sending another message, "Join us or be destroyed." Again the Athenians refused. Finally, Sparta mobilized its full army and marched north. Under the Spartan regent Pausanias, a Greek army of approximately 38,700 hoplites, including 10,000 Spartans and Perioeci, 8,000 Athenians, and contingents from many other cities. Perhaps 70,000 light-armed troops. They met Mardonius's army, perhaps 100,000 Persians and Medicean Greeks near Plataea in Boeotia. The battle on August 27th, 479 BCE, was confused and nearly disastrous for the Greeks. The Greek line was forced to reposition during the night. Mardonius thought they were retreating and attacked at dawn. The battle was brutal. The Spartans and Tegeans held the right wing against the Persian elite infantry. The fighting was desperate, perhaps the fiercest of the entire war. Mardonius himself led charges from horseback. Then Mardonius was killed, possibly by a Spartan named Arimnestus. With their commander dead, Persian morale collapsed. The army broke and fled to their fortified camp. The Greeks stormed the camp, massacred the defenders, and captured enormous wealth. Persian losses. Perhaps 40,000, 50,000 killed. Greek losses. Around 1,300, 1,500, including 91 Spartans, 16 Tegeans, and 52 Athenians. We know these numbers precisely because they were recorded. Mycale, August 27th, 479 BCE, the same day. According to Greek tradition, on the very same day as Plataea, the Greek fleet attacked the remnants of the Persian fleet at Mycale on the Ionian coast. The Greeks beached their ships and fought a land battle against the Persians guarding their ships. The Greeks won decisively, burning the Persian fleet. Whether this really happened on the exact same day is debatable, but the symbolism was powerful. East and west, land and sea. Simultaneously, the Persians were defeated. The impossible had happened. Greece, tiny, fractious, divided Greece, had defeated the greatest empire on earth. Not once, but repeatedly. Marathon, Salamis, Plataea, Mycale. 25 million people had failed to conquer 3 million. An empire stretching across 3 continents had been repelled by city-states that could barely cooperate with each other. The Athenians returned to their city. For the second time in a year, they walked through streets that were now ruins. They climbed to the Acropolis and saw what the Persians had done. Everything was gone. The temples were blackened ruins. The sacred olive tree was a charred stump. The statues lay shattered. The treasuries were empty. Some Athenians wept, but others looked around and saw not just destruction, but possibility. They had survived the unsurvivable. They had defeated the undefeatable. They had lost everything material and kept what mattered most: their freedom, their democracy, themselves. And in that moment, standing in the ruins of everything they had known, the Athenians made a decision that would echo through history. They would rebuild. Not just rebuild, that word is too small, but create something greater than what had been lost. Something that would stand as an eternal monument to the fact that they had faced annihilation and refused to yield. The Golden Age of Athens was about to begin. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. Prelude to Catastrophe, 490-480 BCE. The Seeds of Conflict. To truly understand the magnitude of Athens' rebirth, we must first journey back to the events that led to its destruction. The story begins not in 480 BCE, but a decade earlier, in the scorching summer of 490 BCE, when the first Persian invasion force landed on the plain of Marathon, just 26 miles northeast of Athens. The Persian Empire, under King Darius III, had grown tired of Greek interference in Asia Minor. When Athens and Eretria had sent ships to support the Ionian Revolt, 499-494 BCE, an uprising of Greek cities against Persian rule, they had committed an act that Darius could not forgive. The Ionian capital of Sardis had been burned, and though the revolt was eventually crushed with brutal efficiency, Darius never forgot the Greek involvement. Ancient historians record that he ordered a servant to remind him 3 times before dinner each day, "Master, remember the Athenians." The Battle of Marathon, fought on September 12th, 490 BCE, became the stuff of legend. Against overwhelming odds, approximately 25,000 Persian warriors against 10,000 Athenian hoplites and 1,000 Plataean allies, the Greeks achieved an astounding victory. The Athenian general Miltiades employed brilliant tactics, strengthening his flanks while keeping his center deliberately weak. When the Persians pushed through the center, the Greek wings enveloped them in a devastating pincer movement. By day's end, 6,400 Persians lay dead on the bloodied plain, while the Athenians lost only 192 men. These fallen heroes were buried under a great mound that still stands today, a testament to their sacrifice. But Marathon was not the end. It was merely the beginning. Darius, humiliated and enraged, immediately began planning a far more massive invasion. However, fate intervened. In 486 BCE, Egypt revolted against Persian rule, demanding Darius's attention. Then, in the same year, the great king died, leaving his ambitions to his son and successor, Xerxes III. Xerxes's grand design. Xerxes III, whose name meant ruling over heroes, was determined to succeed where his father had failed. But unlike Darius, who had sent a relatively modest expeditionary force, Xerxes planned an invasion so vast it would dwarf anything the ancient world had seen. For 4 full years, from 484 to 480 BCE, the entire Persian Empire mobilized for war. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing a generation later, painted a picture of almost unimaginable scale. Contingents arrived from every corner of the empire. Persians in their distinctive scale armor and felt caps, Medes with their leather uniforms, Assyrians with bronze helmets, Bactrians with cane bows, Indians in cotton garments, Ethiopians wrapped in lion and leopard skins, Arabs on camels, even remote tribes from the edges of the known world. Herodotus claimed the army numbered over 2 million men, though modern historians consider this a vast exaggeration. More realistic estimates place the invasion force at 200,000 DOS to 300,000 combat troops, with perhaps an equal number of support personnel, still an absolutely staggering force by ancient standards. The logistical preparations were extraordinary. Xerxes ordered the construction of a double bridge of boats across the Hellespont, the Dardanelles, linking Asia to Europe. When a storm destroyed the first bridges, Xerxes allegedly had the engineers beheaded and ordered his men to whip the waters with chains as punishment for defying his will. A display of hubris that Greek writers would remember. New bridges were built, each consisting of 360 ships lashed together with cables made of papyrus and flax. To supply this massive army on its march through Thrace and Macedonia, the Persians established supply depots years in advance, and even dug a canal through the Mount Athos Peninsula to allow their fleet to avoid the treacherous waters where a previous Persian fleet had been destroyed in 492 BCE. The Greek world watched these preparations with growing dread. It seemed impossible that the scattered, often quarreling city-states could stand against such overwhelming might. Many cities immediately Medazed submitted to Persian demands for earth and water, the traditional symbols of submission. But a coalition of Greek states, led by Sparta and Athens, chose defiance over surrender. The Greek response. Themistocles' vision. In Athens, one man saw the coming storm more clearly than anyone else. Themistocles, son of Neocles. A brilliant but controversial politician, Themistocles had risen from relatively modest origins to become the most influential voice in Athenian politics. In 483 BCE, when rich new veins of silver were discovered in the state-owned mines at Lorient, Themistocles proposed something radical. Rather than distributing the windfall among the citizens, the usual practice, he convinced the Athenian assembly to invest the entire sum and enormous fortune of approximately 100 talents of silver in building a new fleet of triremes. Themistocles' stated justification was Athens' ongoing war with the rival city of Aegina, but his true concern was Persia. He understood something fundamental. Athens could never defeat Persia on land alone. The city could field perhaps 10,000 to 12,000 hoplites, well-trained and courageous, but hopelessly outnumbered. At sea, however, the playing field might be more even. Between 483 and 480 BCE, Athens built 200 triremes, creating the largest fleet in Greece and transforming Athens from a primarily land-based power into a naval superpower. A trireme was a magnificent but demanding vessel. Approximately 120 feet long and 20 feet wide, powered by 170 rowers arranged in 3 tiers, hence the name trireme, these ships could reach speeds of 8 to 9 knots and were highly maneuverable. Each trireme cost about 1 talent of silver to build and required a crew of 200 men, 170 rowers, 15 sailors, 10 marines, and 5 officers. The investment was staggering, but it would prove to be the decision that saved Greece. In 481 BCE, as Xerxes' preparations reached their final stages, representatives from the Greek city-states that chose to resist met at Corinth. They formed the Hellenic League, a defensive alliance unprecedented in Greek history. Sparta, with its legendary military prowess, was chosen to lead the allied forces on land and sea. Athens contributed the largest fleet. Together, they planned to hold the Persian advance at strategic choke points, where superior Persian numbers would count for less. The catastrophe: Athens falls, 480 BCE. Thermopylae, the noble sacrifice. In early August 480 BCE, the Persian army crossed from Asia into Europe over Xerxes' famous bridges. The massive host moved slowly through Thrace and Macedonia, then into Thessaly, consuming supplies at an astounding rate. Ancient sources claimed they could drink rivers dry. The Greek defensive strategy called for making stands at narrow passes where the vast Persian numbers would be negated. The first major stand would be at Thermopylae, the Hot Gates, a narrow coastal pass between the mountains and the sea in central Greece. Here the Spartan king Leonidas V took up position with approximately 7,000 Greek troops, including his personal bodyguard of 300 Spartans, all men who had living sons, ensuring that their bloodlines would continue even if they fell. The Battle of Thermopylae lasted 3 days, beginning around August 17 and 18, 480 BCE. For 2 days the Greeks held the pass against wave after wave of Persian assaults. Xerxes sent in his Median troops first, but they were cut down by the disciplined Greek phalanx. Next came the Immortals, the Persian king's elite guard of 10,000 warriors, so named because their number was always kept at exactly 10,000 hours. Any casualties were immediately replaced. Even these elite troops could make no headway against the wall of Greek shields and spears in the narrow pass. On the 3rd day, disaster struck from an unexpected quarter. A local Greek named Ephialtes, motivated either by promised wealth or personal grudges, revealed to Xerxes the existence of a mountain path, the Anopeia track, that wound around the Greek position. Xerxes immediately sent his immortals up this path during the night. When Leonidas learned of this betrayal at dawn on August 20th, he dismissed most of the Greek forces, knowing that their position was hopeless once outflanked. He kept only his 300 Spartans, 700 Thespians, and 400 Thebans, who may have been held as hostages to ensure Theban loyalty. The final stand of the Spartans has echoed through history. When told that Persian arrows would be so numerous they would block out the sun, a Spartan warrior named Dionysus allegedly replied, "Good, then we shall fight in the shade." When a Persian envoy demanded they surrender their weapons, Leonidas gave his immortal reply, "Molon Labe, come and take them." The Greeks fought with superhuman courage, driving back attack after attack. When their spears broke, they fought with swords. When their swords broke, they fought with daggers and even their bare hands. Leonidas fell in the fighting, and the battle raged around his body. finally overwhelmed from front and rear, pushed back to a small hillock. The last defenders were annihilated by a hail of arrows and javelins. Not one of the 300 Spartans survived. Their sacrifice, though militarily unsuccessful in stopping the Persian advance, achieved something perhaps more important. It bought time and it inspired. The epitaph later inscribed at the site captured its essence. "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here obedient to their laws we lie." The fall of Athens, September 480 BCE. With Thermopylae fallen and the Greek defensive line breached, the Persian army poured into central Greece. The Greek fleet, which had been fighting a series of inconclusive naval battles off Artemisium during the same days as Thermopylae, fell back to the island of Salamis. The situation was desperate. Many Greek cities in the path of the Persian advance surrendered immediately. Others were abandoned as their populations fled south. In Athens, panic gripped the population. Should they evacuate? Should they try to defend the city? Could they possibly withstand a siege? The debate in the Athenian assembly was fierce. Many recalled the cryptic oracle that Apollo had given when the Athenians sent envoys to Delphi earlier that year. The first prophecy had been utterly pessimistic, essentially telling the Athenians to flee as far as they could. But when the envoys pleaded for a more hopeful answer, the oracle had spoken again, mentioning that divine Salamis would bring death to women's children, and that the wooden wall alone would remain unconquered. Themistocles interpreted the wooden wall as the new fleet of triremes, not the wooden palisade some suggested should be built around the Acropolis. He argued passionately that the Athenians should trust in their ships, evacuate the entire city, and make their stand at sea. His interpretation was controversial and required tremendous courage. He was essentially asking the entire population to abandon everything they knew, all their homes and possessions, and bet their survival on an untested naval strategy. The evacuation decree, later discovered inscribed on stone and known as the Themistocles Decree, though its authenticity is debated among historians, ordered all Athenian men of military age to board the ships, while women, children, and the elderly were to be evacuated to the island of Salamis, the city of Trozen across the Saronic Gulf, and the island of Aegina. The decree also ordered that all sacred treasures be removed from the temples and placed under guard at Salamis. The evacuation was a logistical nightmare and an emotional catastrophe. Imagine the scenes. Families being torn apart at the docks, not knowing if they would ever see each other again. Elderly citizens weeping as they took one last look at homes where they had spent their entire lives. Mothers clutching their children as they boarded ships bound for unknown refuges. Priests carefully wrapping sacred objects that had been in their temples for centuries. The streets echoed with the sounds of wailing and prayer. Dogs ran alongside departing ships, howling for their masters. One story, probably apocryphal but emotionally true to the moment, tells of Xanthippus's dog jumping into the sea and swimming after his master's ship all the way to Salamis, where it collapsed and died from exhaustion on the beach. Yet not everyone left. A small group of treasurers and priests barricaded themselves on the Acropolis, either misinterpreting the oracle about the wooden wall as referring to a physical wooden palisade, or simply refusing to abandon their sacred duty to protect the temples. A handful of elderly citizens, too proud or too stubborn to flee, remained in their homes, prepared to die where they had lived. By early September 480 BCE, Athens stood nearly empty, a ghost city waiting for its fate. The Persian army, having swept through Boeotia and Attica, arrived outside the city walls. Xerxes, from his military camp, gazed upon the prize that had eluded his father. There was no resistance, no army to fight, only a nearly deserted city. Yet those few defenders on the Acropolis refused to surrender. The siege of the Acropolis was brief but fierce. The Persians, expecting an easy conquest, found themselves frustrated by the determined defenders who rolled stones down upon attackers and fought back with desperate courage. But numbers and preparation eventually told. Persian archers, taking position on the nearby Areopagus hill, which overlooked the Acropolis, rained arrows down on the defenders. Persian engineers found a vulnerable spot on the northern slope, where the fortifications were weakest. Scaling the cliff in a daring night-time assault, they breached the defenses. The remaining defenders, seeing their position was hopeless, chose to die fighting or threw themselves from the walls rather than surrender. Not one of the Acropolis defenders survived. With the citadel fallen, Xerxes' revenge began. The Persian king, still nursing the grudge over the burning of Sardis during the Ionian Revolt 20 years earlier, ordered the complete destruction of Athens. It was not to be a military occupation, but an annihilation, a message written in ash and blood. Persian soldiers, many of whom came from cultures that valued fire as sacred, particularly the Medes and Persians who followed Zoroastrian traditions, which made fire worship central to their religion, were nevertheless ordered to use fire as a weapon of destruction. The temples came first. The magnificent temple of Athena Polias, which had stood on the Acropolis for over a century, and housed the ancient olive-wood statue of Athena that was said to have fallen from heaven, was put to the torch. The flames consumed the wooden roof beams, caused the stone to crack and split in the intense heat, and melted the bronze decorations and offerings that generations of Athenians had dedicated to their goddess. The old temple of Athena, the predecessor to the Parthenon that would later stand on the site, collapsed in a roar of falling marble and timber. But the destruction was not limited to the Acropolis. Persian soldiers fanned out through the city, systematically setting fire to every significant building. The Agora, the heart of Athenian civic life, where Socrates would later philosophize, was torched. The private homes of wealthy citizens, which often featured beautiful frescoes and precious furniture, were looted first and then burned. The workshops of craftsmen, filled with tools and half-finished works, went up in smoke. Libraries of papyrus scrolls containing poetry, history, and philosophy that would now be lost forever became fuel for the flames. The olive groves that surrounded Athens, considered sacred to Athena and economically vital to the city, were either burned or deliberately cut down. A practice that was considered particularly heinous in Greek culture, as olive trees took decades to become productive. The ancient sacred olive tree on the Acropolis, which legend said had been Athena's gift to Athens in her contest with Poseidon for patronage of the city, was burned to a stump. From Salamis, across the narrow strait, the Athenian refugees watched their city burn. The smoke rose in massive columns, visible for dozens of miles. Ancient writers describe the scene with heartbreaking detail. Mothers shielding their children's eyes from the sight, men weeping openly, something Greek culture normally discouraged, elders falling to their knees in despair. At night, the orange glow of the fires illuminated the sky, a hellish beacon of destruction. The smell of burning wood, stone, and all the materials of civilization carried across the water on the wind. For the Athenians, it seemed like the end of everything. Their city, their homes, their temples, all were being reduced to ruins. Some must have questioned whether Themistocles' strategy had been correct. Perhaps they should have fought and died defending their walls rather than living to see this destruction. The psychological impact was devastating. This was not just the loss of property, it was an assault on Athenian identity, history, and pride. Yet even in this darkest moment, Themistocles remained focused on his strategy. The city was gone, but the people survived. The fleet remained intact. And in those narrow waters between Salamis and the mainland, he saw an opportunity that would change everything. The turning point, Salamis, September 480 BCE. The trap is set. After the burning of Athens, Xerxes faced a strategic decision. His land forces controlled most of Greece, north of the Isthmus of Corinth, where the remaining Greek land army was frantically building defensive walls. His fleet, while having suffered some losses in storms and skirmishes at Artemisium, still vastly outnumbered the Greek navy. Many of his advisers urged him to sail directly to the Peloponnese, land troops, and crush the remaining Greek resistance. But Xerxes was cautious. He had heard reports of the fierce Greek resistance at Thermopylae and Artemisium. He knew that his long supply lines were vulnerable. His army, though massive, was consuming supplies at an unsustainable rate, feeding several 100,000 men and tens of thousands of animals required a constant stream of provisions. Moreover, autumn was approaching, and with it the season of dangerous Mediterranean storms that could destroy his fleet. The Greek fleet, numbering approximately 370 triremes, about 200 from Athens, with the rest contributed by Corinth, Aegina, Megara, Sparta, and other allied cities, had retreated to the narrow straits between Salamis and the Attic mainland. The allied command was divided and demoralized. Many commanders, particularly those from the Peloponnesian cities, wanted to abandon Salamis and fall back to the Isthmus of Corinth to protect their home territories. The refugees on Salamis, tens of thousands of Athenians faced starvation if the fleet departed, but military logic seemed to favor retreat. Themistocles found himself fighting a battle on two fronts, against the Persians and against his own allies. In a series of heated war councils held on Salamis, he argued passionately for making a stand in the straits. His reasoning was tactical genius. In the open waters near the isthmus, the larger and more numerous Persian fleet would have room to maneuver and could use its numbers to devastating effect. But in the narrow straits of Salamis, only a limited number of ships could engage at once, neutralizing the Persian numerical advantage. Furthermore, the heavier Greek triremes, built for ramming attacks, would be more effective in close-quarters combat than the lighter, more maneuverable but more fragile Persian vessels. The debate grew so heated that the Corinthian commander, Adimantus, allegedly told Themistocles, "At the games, those who start before the signal are beaten with rods." Themistocles shot back, "Yes, but those who start too late win no prizes." When the Spartan admiral Eurybiades seemed ready to order a retreat, Themistocles reportedly threatened that if the fleet withdrew, the Athenians would load their families onto their ships and sail to Italy to found a new city there, leaving the other Greeks to face Persia alone. Whether this threat was real or a brilliant bluff, it worked. the fleet would stay and fight. But Themistocles faced another problem. What if the Persians simply didn't attack? What if they bypassed Salamis, landed troops on the Peloponnese, and forced the Greek fleet to abandon its advantageous position to chase them? Themistocles needed to ensure the Persians would attack on his terms, in the place of his choosing. According to Herodotus, Themistocles then executed one of the most audacious deceptions in military history. He secretly sent his children's tutor, a slave named Sicinus, who could speak Persian, across the strait to the Persian camp with a message for Xerxes. The message claimed that Themistocles was secretly sympathetic to the Persian cause and warned that the Greek fleet was planning to escape during the night. If Xerxes wanted to destroy the Greek navy, he should block the exits from the strait immediately and attack at dawn. The message was perfectly crafted to appeal to Xerxes' desires and confirm his existing suspicions. The Greeks appeared trapped and demoralized. Why wouldn't some of their leaders try to switch sides? The prospect of catching the entire Greek fleet in a trap and destroying it in a single battle was irresistible. Xerxes took the bait. The battle, September 23-24, 480 BCE. On the night of September 23rd, as the full moon illuminated the waters, Xerxes ordered his fleet into position. He sent approximately 200 Egyptian ships, considered his best sailors, to sail around Salamis and block the western exit from the strait, while the main Persian fleet, perhaps 600-650 ships, quietly moved to block the eastern exits and prepare for a dawn attack. The Persian sailors, many of whom had been rowing and fighting for months, were exhausted, but they moved into position under the cover of darkness. The Persians didn't know that their movements had been observed. Aristides, an Athenian politician who had been ostracized, exiled, by Themistocles in earlier political struggles, but who returned when Athens was threatened, managed to slip through the Persian lines in a small boat. He came to Themistocles with urgent news. They were surrounded. Themistocles, who may have anticipated this, possibly it was part of his plan all along, called another war council and announced the situation. The Greek commanders realized they had no choice, but to fight retreat was no longer possible. Themistocles had gotten exactly what he wanted, a battle in the narrow straits with no possibility of retreat, where Greek desperation and courage would count for more than Persian numbers. As dawn broke on September 24th, 480 BCE, one of history's most crucial battles began. The Greek fleet, arranged in a defensive line across the narrow strait, with the Athenians on the left wing and the Spartans and Aeginetans on the right, waited for the Persian attack. Xerxes, determined to witness his great victory, had a golden throne placed on a hill on the mainland, probably Mount Aigaleo, overlooking the strait, with scribes ready to record the names of commanders who distinguished themselves in battle. The Persian fleet began to enter the strait in the early morning, their ships advancing in multiple lines. Almost immediately, problems became apparent. The strait, perhaps less than 2 kilometers wide at its narrowest point, couldn't accommodate the massive Persian fleet in any kind of effective formation. Ships crowded together, their oars becoming entangled. The current and wind in the strait, which the Greeks knew well from years of fishing and trading in these waters, worked against the Persian formation. Then came the moment that changed everything. The Greek fleet, which had initially appeared to be backing away, possibly a feigned retreat to draw the Persians deeper into the trap, suddenly surged forward with their war cry, "Alala!" The Greek ships, heavier and sturdier than most of the Persian vessels, crashed into the enemy line like battering rams. A trireme in ramming attack was a fearsome weapon. The bronze-sheathed ram on the prow, positioned just below the waterline, could punch through the hull of an enemy ship with devastating effect. The impact was tremendous. The sound of splintering wood could be heard across the water. The rammed ship would immediately begin taking on water, and within minutes it would sink or capsize. The crew, many of whom couldn't swim — swimming was not a common skill in the ancient world — would drown or struggle in the water, weighed down by armor and weapons. But ramming required precise timing, expert seamanship, and room to maneuver all things the Greeks had, and the Persians, crowded in the narrow strait, lacked. The Persian ships, unable to maneuver effectively, crashed into each other in their confusion. Phoenician captains, considered the best in the Persian fleet, found their ships tangled with Egyptian, Ionian, and Carian vessels. Orders couldn't be heard over the chaos of battle. The Greeks, fighting with the desperate courage of men protecting their families, who were watching from the shore of Salamis, and with the skill of crews who had trained together for years, methodically tore apart the Persian formation. The battle raged throughout the day. Aeschylus, the great Athenian playwright who fought at Salamis, later wrote a play called The Persians, the oldest surviving Greek tragedy, that described the battle. He wrote of how the sea was no longer visible, choked with wrecks and corpses, and how the Greeks struck and hacked at the Persians like tunny fish or a catch of other fish. The imagery is graphic and deliberate. The Persians were not soldiers engaged in honorable combat, but prey being slaughtered. One particularly dramatic moment involved the Athenian commander Aeneas of Pallene, whose ship rammed and sank a Persian vessel that may have carried one of Xerxes' brothers. Another famous incident involved the Queen Artemisia of Halicarnassus, a Greek woman ruling a city under Persian control, who commanded 5 ships in Xerxes' fleet. When pursued by a Greek ship, she deliberately rammed and sank one of her own allies, a ship from Calinda, to make her pursuers think she was on the Greek side. The ruse worked. The Greek ship broke off pursuit. Xerxes, watching from his throne and not knowing the ship she sank was Persian, supposedly exclaimed, "My men have become women, and my women have become men." By late afternoon, the battle had become a rout. The Persian fleet, or what remained of it, attempted to retreat through the mass of wrecks and bodies clogging the strait. Many Persian ships ran aground on the rocky shores, or were driven onto the small island of Plataea, where Xerxes had placed a force of elite Persian troops to rescue survivors and finish off shipwrecked Greeks. The Greeks, however, landed a force of hoplites on Plataea, who massacred the Persians in brutal close-quarters combat. The casualties were staggering. Ancient sources claim the Persians lost 200 ships or more, with thousands of sailors drowned. The Greeks lost only about 40 ships. More importantly, the myth of Persian invincibility was shattered. The greatest empire in the world had been decisively defeated by a coalition of Greek city-states fighting for their freedom. Xerxes' retreat. That night, as the waters of Salamis churned with debris and bodies, Xerxes faced the bitter reality of defeat. His fleet was shattered. His prestige was damaged. And most critically, his supply lines were now vulnerable. The Greek fleet could potentially sail to the Hellespont and destroy his bridges, trapping his massive army in hostile Greece, with winter approaching. The great king, who had arrived in Greece expecting an easy conquest, now faced potential disaster. In a matter of days, Xerxes made his decision. He would return to Persia with a large portion of his army, leaving his capable general Mardonius with a still formidable force of 100,000–150,000 troops to continue the campaign in the spring. Xerxes himself conducted a rapid, some might say, panicked retreat back to the Hellespont, his grand invasion ending not with the triumph he had envisioned, but with a humiliating withdrawal. The Greeks, exhausted and still outnumbered on land, couldn't immediately follow up on their naval victory. But they had achieved something remarkable. They had broken the back of the Persian invasion. Athens was still in ruins, but the Athenians had proven that courage and cunning could defeat overwhelming force. Final victory: Plataea and Mycale, 479 BCE. The winter of 480–479 BCE. The winter of 480–479 BCE was a time of hardship and uncertainty for the Greek refugees. On Salamis, in Troezen, and on Aegina, tens of thousands of displaced Athenians struggled to survive. Food was scarce. Shelter was inadequate. Families were separated. Children fell ill. The elderly perished from exposure and deprivation. The Athenian refugees were dependent on the charity of their host cities and whatever supplies could be brought in by sea. Meanwhile, in Athens itself, Mardonius and his Persian army had taken up residence in the ruins. The Persian general, far more diplomatically skilled than Xerxes, attempted to split the Greek alliance. He sent envoys to the Athenians on Salamis with generous offers. Persia would rebuild Athens at Persian expense, grant the Athenians control over whatever Greek territory they desired, and make them honored partners in the Persian Empire rather than conquered subjects. All the Athenians had to do was make peace and abandon their alliance with Sparta. It was a tempting offer for a homeless, desperate people. But when the Athenian assembly met to consider the proposal, they gave an answer that has resonated through history. According to Herodotus, they replied that as long as the sun kept its course, they would never make peace with Xerxes. They declared their fight was not just for their city, but for all Greece, for their temples and the tombs of their ancestors, and for the freedom that defined the Greek way of life. The Persian envoys were sent away empty-handed. The Spartans, who had sent their own delegation to observe the proceedings, and who feared the Athenians might accept the Persian offer, were so relieved that they pledged to feed the entire Athenian refugee population for the duration of the war. But the Spartans were slow to move their army north of the isthmus. They were still fortifying the isthmus itself, creating a massive wall that they hoped would protect the Peloponnese, even if Athens and the rest of Greece fell. This delay infuriated the Athenians. In the spring of 479 BCE, Mardonius again occupied Athens. The Athenians had briefly returned during the winter, only to evacuate again when the Persian army approached. This second occupation and destruction of Athens further inflamed tensions between Athens and Sparta. Finally, under intense pressure, and perhaps fearing that the Athenians might actually accept the Persian terms out of desperation, the Spartan regent Pausanias led the Spartan army north, joined by contingents from across the Peloponnese. The largest Greek army ever assembled began to march toward a confrontation with Mardonius's forces. The Battle of Plataea, August 479 BCE. The two armies met near the city of Plataea in Boeotia, close to the Athenian border, in early August 479 BCE. The Greek force was enormous by the standards of ancient warfare. Approximately 38,700 hoplites, heavily armored infantry, and perhaps 70,000 light troops for a total of over 100,000 men. The Spartans contributed 10,000 hoplites, 5,000 Spartiates full Spartan citizens, plus 5,000 perioikoi free non-citizens from the surrounding territory, each Spartiate accompanied by several helot servants. Athens, despite its recent hardships, fielded 8,000 hoplites. Contingents came from Corinth, Megara, Tegea, and dozens of other cities. It was a united Greece facing the Persian threat. Mardonius commanded a force of similar size, perhaps 100,000 to 120,000 men, composed of Persian and Median cavalry and infantry, plus Greek allies, including Thebans, Thessalians, and other cities that had sided with Persia. The Persian cavalry in particular was a formidable force that had no real equivalent in the Greek armies. The battle did not begin immediately. For over a week, the two armies maneuvered for position, neither wanting to attack across unfavorable terrain. The Greeks held a position on the lower slopes of Mount Cithaeron, where the terrain was too rough for effective cavalry charges. Mardonius held the plains near the Asopus River, ideal for his cavalry, but less advantageous for an infantry assault against prepared positions. The Persian cavalry, however, began to make the Greek position untenable. In a series of hit-and-run attacks, they targeted the Greek supply lines, killed foraging parties, and most critically, discovered and destroyed the Gagathia Spring, the Greeks' main water source. The Greek commanders, meeting in council, decided they had no choice but to retreat to a new position closer to Plataea, where water would be available. The retreat began on the night of August 1819, 479 BCE, but it quickly turned chaotic. Greek armies, composed of independent city-state contingents, each under its own commanders, lacked the centralized command structure of modern armies. In the darkness, units became separated. Some commanders, particularly the Spartans and Tegeans, moved too slowly, reluctant to be the first to retreat. The Athenians on the left wing began their movement, but then paused, waiting for orders. By dawn, the Greek army was scattered and vulnerable, spread across several miles in small, separated groups. Mardonius, observing the Greek retreat from his camp, believed the Greeks were fleeing in panic. He immediately ordered a general attack, with his elite Persian infantry in the center charging directly at the Spartan positions. This was the moment he had been waiting for, a chance to crush the Greeks in the open field. But the Greeks, despite the chaos of the night's movements, were far from broken. When the Persian forces rushed forward, the Spartans, under Pausanias' command, quickly formed their phalanx. The Spartan phalanx was the most formidable infantry formation in the ancient world, a wall of bronze shields.